You're going to meet two gentlemen that have worked on something relatively unique. They have been out benchmarking all the winning companies. What do they do? How do they strike the right balance between cost and customer, between innovation and transformation, and model how all these companies actually do to succeed. And both of them have a very impressive CV, and I'm sure you'll be relatively engaged when you hear the two gentlemen. They have a lot to offer. Henrik basically shocked me a bit by saying he's in the advisory board for Google. How the hell do you get there?
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Yes, just a little bit about what we actually do. So my name is Henrik van Scheel, and that is Mark van Roosing.
Hello, everybody.
And Mark is a professor at the university. He has been leading research with universities over hundreds of universities across the world, studying outperformers and underperformers, what they actually do in terms of innovation and transformations. A lot of these thinkings has been over years been collected into a way of thinking, how organizations structures the way of thinking, how they should go about it, how they should work around it, which we called, from our point of view, method and approaches. So everything which we have structured today, Mark represents the Global University Alliance, and I represent the Leading Practice, which is a non-profit organization which has over 2,500 practitioners. Everything which you see here, we actually give out for free to companies who apply it. Both the support that Mark and I actually give to leading organizations is actually how they actually go about it.
Which I think then it's enough, because you will hear a little bit about it. How does it work? What's the idea? What works? What doesn't work? And even though we only have short time, we know most organizations, they do some basic mistakes in applying Lean, Six Sigma, business process reengineering principles. Let me tell you a basic one. Let's say an organization like yours is unique in an area, and I believe you are unique. There's other production companies who are not very unique. They are unique only in the way what they produce, actually. In this case, it's only about cost, right? It's how fast they get it out, and it's only by cost. It's only about supply chain, and it's you actually optimize the out of that organization. It's about cost, because that's the only way they can differentiate. Has anybody of you heard ever of red ocean, blue ocean? Yeah, most. They are in a red ocean. This ontology, this methodology is actually used because the red ocean there's a lot of sharks. Everybody fights about the same thing. Hence the red ocean. It literally symbolizes the blood. If you're in the blue ocean, it's by definition that you actually differentiate. Thereby you are unique. Does this make sense? If you are unique, you create a value somebody else doesn't create. Does this make sense? Now, if I go to organizations and said, let's listen to what Carlsberg does. They do it the right way. And we work with Carlsberg, they do it a good way. And we work with Lego, they do a good way too. And so does FLS Smith. But if you would do what they do, and there's areas they don't differentiate with, and there's areas where you are unique. Let me tell you basic principles. If you then implement exactly the same idea, and you optimize in an area where you would be unique, what would happen? Go ahead. Yes. First of all, if I do what everybody else does, you don't need to be a genius to already know I get the same result what everybody else gets. As an engineer, and I'm an engineer, that appeals to a very normal thinking. Same input, same output. It's kind of, you don't really to be a lot of a genius to get that. So we see organizations doing a basic mistake here. Now, what happens if I start optimizing in an area where I am unique? What happens? You actually destroy your value. Because you don't optimize the uniqueness. What happens in an area where I optimize and where I don't create any value? Can I optimize myself in creating more value? The reasons I ask these questions is from an engineering. This is where often things go wrong. Can I optimize and get more value out of it? It's physically impossible. No. An area where I don't create value, optimizing what I have does not create more value. Does this make sense? This is very, very important. This is where something goes wrong.
And it goes wrong for most companies. They do that mistake again and again. And another common mistake, which is a very, very big challenge in the market. So topics like innovation and transformation, they're very, very high words, especially innovation. We innovate in everything. We put an innovation word on everything we say and do. But there is a very, very big difference. If you look on the outperforming companies, the one in the blue ocean, they differentiate. They literally innovate to differentiate. If you look at the ones who are in the red ocean, they fight and bleed and they just fight for everything within it. They don't differentiate. They optimize the hell out of it. So what is the difference between innovation and transformation? When we look at research, over 38% of people really don't know the difference between innovation and transformation. The worst of it is that when you look on 34% of people, even if they know the difference between innovation and transformation, they don't know where to start to innovate or to transformate. So if we look on the definition and the difference of innovation and transformation, the Oxford Dictionary already says that innovation comes from the Latin word innovatus and means to renew or to bring something, to introduce something new. So within innovation, it's the act of creating and introducing something new to something. Whereas the transformation is the state of making a change or alter an improvement of something that already exists. Comes from the word transformation, which means change or to alter something which already exists. So by definition, you can only change something which already exists. Thereby, most people call something innovation, which is innovation, which is actually transformation. When you change something which is already existing, it's transformation. It's not innovation. So that's the two big differences. Many organizations go wrong there, which is a very, very big challenge.
Let's keep this slide, Henrik.
Yeah.
And I want to be a little bit, because we are here on the Danish culture, so we're all happy with being direct, because that's how we learn the best. Now I'm a professor in Lean and Six Sigma and business process management and business process reengineering. So don't take my comments as criticism. Take them as of the limits of what can be applied and what cannot. In order to apply Lean, I must have a process, right? Because I define the quality it needs to have and the output it needs to have. If I don't have the process, I actually need to create the process and then I still apply the Lean principles. But that's then business process engineering. Then I apply the Lean principles again to it. So is it innovation or is it transformation? It's transformation. As a matter of fact, this is where already the whole thing goes wrong. I'm telling you, about 90% of all speeches I ever hear, they talk about what great innovation they did in their supply chain because they used Lean. I mean, I love Lean. I teach it. And do I get a lot of value out of it? Yes. What kind of value? Optimization value. Not value in new things of innovation. Therefore, it's not value. But that's only because cost is value for executives. But there's no question. Does it give a lot? Yes. Another thing that is done wrong, most engineers, they apply innovation, if we go back one slide, they apply innovation to all of their areas. That means that they rethink too much, they invent the wheel in too many areas again and again. Here's the basic principles. This comes from Pareto, the Italian tax minister. He's actually an economist. He made the 20/80 rules, it's known. It actually comes from economics. This comes from business. 20% of your business is differentiating. Therefore, where should I innovate? In 20%. If I innovate in some of the areas, you have too high cost and too little value getting out of it. In at least 80% of my business, you do not differentiate. Therefore, you need to have a high level of standardization and a high level of integration and fully optimized. If you don't have that, it destroys your part of your innovation. It's too high cost of doing your business. And I know you guys had just with the battle this morning. This is the introduction you had, the customer centricity of innovation and the service flows versus the cost, performance, and operating of how you do. That's, by the way, why you did it. So let's go a little bit through what some of the organizations did. So this is a learning. This was one of the analysis we did. This is the last 40 years of growth, ups and down. What we did, we analyzed the top 500 companies and said, what are they doing in their up times and what are they doing in their down times? What was very fascinating was for us that we found out that they actually have, from an engineering perspective, they have 6 things they can screw on. 6 things. That's it. Let's take a look what they do. So this down here, we see the stock cycle. So we looked at the economics on the stocks. That's known data. And we looked at the economic cycle of extract of the top 500 companies, which is known data too. Let's look what they then did. In the first recession, this is the oil shock crisis of the 1973 to 1975. Some of you have been around. I did too. So we see the first thing they did was service and cost model. So it started with cost savings. Now please note that this is it's like us. Every one of you teaches your kids already about thinking to be effective and efficient. 100 years ago, this was new. The first one to ever think of that was Henry Ford. So please just note, you have to remember, we are so advanced in our thinking, this has not always been around. If you go 50 years ago, there is less than 90% of the same top 500 companies. Why? They had the size, they had the money, they had the market position, they had the brand. They should have been able to innovate. But that didn't exist back then. Wouldn't it be those who had the horse wagons, who sold the horse wagon, who should have bought the automotive industry? They had the money, they had the brand, they went transport business. Today we already think this way. I go to a gas station. It's not anymore a gas station. It's a porno shop. It's a bakery. It's a candy shop. Maybe shouldn't have started with the first one. I saw some taking notes. Just like but our way of thinking today is more advanced than it was. So I'm trying to bring, this is in all of us. So we had cost model first. We see cost model applying here. Service model, the first one to do that is United Airlines. They had the idea of saying, we cannot compete with our flights. So they actually bought buses and transported the people. Again, but they were in the business before of airline. Now they bought buses transporting the people to their airline. Today that's very normal. It's like our gas station, who is both a bakery and is both a video shop and is both a candy. It's the first one to think of this here, a new service model. This includes new services. This includes, furthermore, a service flow. There is not one organization today who doesn't consider their service flow. So some of you, Henrik was involved and myself in the Lego transformation. By the way, if you want to have the page, there's a 40-page description of how Lego, many of you who are in Denmark know, if you go 15 years back, they could hardly survive. They had really difficulty surviving. Their service transformation, they have described in an over 40-page document, which is actually on our homepage, how they did that service flow. I would say that's the one mistake most organizations do. They only think in process flows. They don't think in service flow. And it's not the same. Processes are what I do, what I deliver, that's my service. So, then new one. Oops, suddenly we had thinking in revenue model, a revenue flow. So they said, oops, we need to get a new way of making money, which I know Novozymes is masters in. You guys think in this. This is your business model. As much as I know from the executives that I've been involved with, you have a number of saying this amount, and I'm not saying the number because that's the confidentiality, but this amount has to come from new business. This next year, this the following year. So you have a very radical strategy of saying, this is what we need to have. Next year's revenue needs to come from new areas than only this year's. Please note, not a lot of industries work that same way. You are already unique in this. I can already tell you that you are applying the cost model, you are applying the service model, you are applying the revenue model, and oops, look at this. This was in the 90s. The first one to actually come up with it, this is a performance model. This was Michael Hammer. He's the father of business process reengineering. Was huge in the 90s. All Lean, Six Sigma, and all those ideas came from here. This guy came forward and said, you can actually model your performance. Yes, I can do that. Same principles here. Oh, this is new. Take a look at this. This was the first time, and this time in between the 80s and 90s, that the model was used for growth. Here they saw, I can use performance models for growth too. Here I use performance model and cost model together to reduce the cost. Here I actually do it to improve my go-to-market, my time to market. But it's different principles. They looked at the same principles, but we furthermore see value model. This was a totally new thing in the 2000s, which came from the .com, if you remember. They taught the new business models and the value. They said, the competition in the market is so much, you need to bring value to the market. It's like you with your mobile phone, saying, I'm waiting, I'm not going to say the vendor's name, I'm waiting on their line 25 minutes, their service is so bad, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to pay for that service, I'm going to shift. So you expect something, you expect value out of it for a certain amount of cost. If not, you are willing to jump to get it somewhere else. So suddenly value plays a role. You can model the value proposition, you can actually model the value within it. And no, I'm not talking about the value chain. That's not the same. That's only your process flows. That's not equal to value. It's only called value chain due to Porter's description that what follows each other, it provides value to each other. I'm talking about a different kind of value. For example, you guys as researcher, or how you do your vendor fill up, and how you can be able to fulfill certain customer needs, can provide a certain form of value to your organization in your service flow. That's a value flow. Can I look at my value flow within my processes? Yes. As a matter of fact, that's exactly why we are talking it, because that's what we feel that you are missing. The perspectives of looking at it in a different view. Where should I be looking at cost? Where should I not? So let's look at the next one. Here we see all of them applied, but something new came up after 2005. It's the operating model. It was something from MIT, Jean Ross. She wrote a book, Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy. She says, in reality, if you want to enterprise, if you want to architect your entire enterprise, you need to look at your operating model. How do we operate? Which, by the way, is exactly the same discussion you guys are having today. Let's now look at what did they who succeeded with it continually. What did they do different than those who did not do as good? Because those who keep on being on the top are defined by good in the market. Let's take a look at here. These we tagged underperformers or outperformers. Please note, this is how many who do it. So the underperformers, they look mostly on their cost model. They actually think they can survive the crisis through only cutting cost. I know Novozymes does not think that way because your biggest agenda is innovation. But cost needs to be there as well. You are actually in some of those areas, but I want to discuss some of it. They actually believe it must be the biggest driver for everything. Yes, I need to apply it. As a matter of fact, I need to apply it to 80% of my business. It must not be my dominant. I cannot grow out of a cost strategy, obviously. Then they look at operating model, then performance model, then revenue model, then their customer value model, and then their service to it. If you look over here, you would actually see a totally different. Take a look at here. This one represents the cost modeling perspectives.
And looking at the difference, the key difference between the underperformers and the outperformers is that the outperformers did it exactly the same way, just the opposite. They focused on creating value, customer value model, service model, and revenue model. They did the same thing on operating model, performance model, and cost model, but the focus was less. The main driver was customer value.
Here you see it. They did the opposite. Look at this. Here you have it on the top. That's the customer service and revenue model. Here you have it for the outperformers. Can you see the difference? Now, I do realize different industries you apply differently. But it's still an amazing thing that all 6 models mattered. So which obviously leads to, you guys look at customer focus, you guys look at customer focus. I can already tell you, you need to do the exercise you already did. Again, looking at it, which of these parts affects my operating model? How we operate? Which of these parts affects, where can I increase my performance? Or where can I have the same performance with lower cost? Mm-hmm. Where can I have the same quality with a lower cost? Or where can I live with that quality standard? I know from an engineering, we always need to be everything 100%. There can be aspects of saying this is good enough in that flow.
So the biggest challenge is actually not necessarily applying it. All companies, they actually know they need to apply all 6 business models. But the biggest challenge is they need to apply several strategies at the same time and in different sequences which they need to focus on. So you cannot just grow with a cost strategy. You actually need to have a balance between many of them. So what you just saw today, these new business models is not big rocket science. Most executives, they actually know them. You see, he's very quite familiar with a cost model and revenue model. Chief Operation Officer, he's very familiar with the operating model and a performance model. An executive, he knows a value model. He works with all of them together. The challenge within it actually is in which sequence do you focus on to get innovation out of it and transformation out of it.
We all know, you in supply chain, time to market matters, right? So it's one of the critical success factors Novozymes has. On which parts, just as an exercise, I know you need to do that exercise yourself later on, but on which 6 models, and it's multiple, but on which 2 would time to market matter? What? Customer value model?
Revenue.
Yeah, this gives the revenue, but it matters here. This is what gives this, but here is where it matters. Here I need to execute it. And where down here? Performance model. This needs to make that happen, but it's here it comes. So if I'm optimizing here, but I'm investing here, I will actually do a counter-effective strategy. That needs to support this one. Does this make sense? This is the exercise you guys need to do later on. But where do we have possible conflicts? Where do they need to interlink? Gets much more out of it.
If you look on innovation and transformation, the main focus for innovation will happen within value, service, and revenue. Innovation can also happen up here, but the main drivers within it will actually be down here. The main element within transformation will be within cost, performance, and operating. You can also do it down here, but the main driver will be in here. So it will some sort of like look a little bit like this. So you have to select the sequence of both of them. Well, I actually already set down here for cost model, value, the revenue model, and service model. The main driver for that will be innovation. That's where you have to identify where can we innovate, where can we create something new, the new value within it. And within a performance and cost and performance operating model, that's where you have to really think about how can we optimize, how can we standardize, how can we integrate as fast as possible. That's where you have to standardize.
Let me put this very practical. I can only optimize the cost of something I already have, right? Hence it falls under transformation. Because the definition of transformation, it must have existed before I changed it. Does that make sense? I can only actually increase my performance of something that actually exists. Hence it sits here. This is not too theoretical, it's by nature. The ontology says it must sit within here. The principles I must apply are within here. I mean, my operating model is how I do things, therefore they must exist. So the nature of it sits here. Henrik said nicely, can I apply innovation principles here? Yes, but the main driver then comes from here. We will come to your model.
In these elements over here, that's where you have to, the main driver of that must be performance. The main driver in the customer-facing area must be value. So you have to use quite different principles. The main driver must be, the source of the main driver is different. Your thinking must be different to drive it. Although the performance to actually create it must come from here. But the main driver will come from creating value in the customer relationship.
So do they need to still apply performance? Yes. That was not the point. I always have those few people who kind of only can see it black and white. Because the line started there, it can only start here, and he cannot understand it because why are we not doing performance in warehouse? That was not the message. Performance starts, the drivers come from this area, all the way through. It doesn't help if this area is the bottleneck for them. Then I still apply performance principles. The value drivers, and it's kind of like, it's better to use the word like Henrik already used, drivers. The value drivers, meaning the drivers from it, come from the front. Let's take a look, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna take one more model before we kind of come to the conclusion of our exercise, the reading. The reasons is we wanted you to understand this, the importance of it. I know most of you are engineers or are from a very technical background, and so I am myself too. I cannot do something I don't understand. Why? I always have difficulty because I said I would like a little bit more details. Here you will get the details of understanding it. Here on the very left, you would have, you don't see it here, it's too sad, it kind of zoomed it out. Here you would actually see the amounts to do it. On the very left, and here you see there is very few who get a strategic advantage. I mean, if it would be lots, they wouldn't have the strategic advantage anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah. By definition, you cannot differentiate if everybody differentiates. Then it's kind of like, well, you could then all differentiate with a different thing, but then you, again, then it's few who differentiate on that one thing. You still come back with the same basics. So there is very few, so too sad we don't see this on the side. So the number here, it's few in percentage who get a strategic advantage. There are, however, there is more who do the same. This is, by the way, called industry best practice. This Rome. You must have you heard this word before, industry best practice? So if somebody comes to you and talks about industry best practice, is it good? Yes. Where do I apply it? In an area where we need to compete head to head with the other. It's not the area where you are unique. If you implement best practice in an area you are unique, what have you just done? You've actually destroyed the uniqueness you have. That's kind of sad. Does that happen? Yes, it happens a lot. So, then best practice is what the rest of the market does. Can I apply it? Yes. You actually do it in the area where there is lots. It's kind of like this. 80% of your business should apply principles of best practice, therefore, you don't differentiate with it. You need to standardize it, you need to integrate it, and you need to optimize it. It's by cost. If not, you have too high cost for the value it gives because you don't differentiate with it. It creates no value. It still, however, needs to support the business. It's kind of like supporting here. Then there is 15% with that you compete head to head with the rest of the market. You got to watch out because others want to do the same or they want to follow you and you need to keep on doing it. Here you got to watch out because here you need to start certain drivers and then there is 5% where you differentiate. And like, let's take a look at. Here's where you apply the customer value model. So the battle you today had was between customer value and the aspects. Let's take a look. Henrik, click here. There is a divide between those two where you see the left and the right. On the left, you see it's driven by customer drivers. By the right, it's driven by cost drivers. So this is the customer perspective. That's the cost perspective. What we want you to do in that exercise is going back and thinking, I need to think of value drivers better. In which ways do we consider here? It's the 5 or 10% where I need to be unique. And here, it's the at least 80% I need to standardize.
And that's the main exercise that you had today. You have seen on the table, you have all this. And what we have actually done, we have put the transformation element in it and the innovation element in it. And you have prioritized today some key tasks that you want to focus on. What we'll ask you to do the next 20 minutes is, and Mark and I will actually go around with you on table and help you with it, to actually focus on saying, what are the key priorities, low-hanging fruits that we have within innovation and transformation. But we have just shown you the 6 different business models that you need to work with and how they work. So they all reside within each other. So within cost, you have performance, you have operating, and you have cost. That's what creates it, and that's how they need to work together. Within customer focus, you have revenue model, value model, and service model.